I'm Mackenzie Williams, 32 years old, a physical therapist from Seattle who married into what I thought was a picture-perfect family. My husband Jason and I have been married for 4 years now, but last month at our regular family dinner, something felt different. The atmosphere was charged with tension as my mother-in-law Diane circled the table serving her famous ribeye steaks to everyone except me. I've always felt like an outsider in this tight-knit family, but that night confirmed my worst fears. Before I get into the full story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to support others going through similar family struggles. Jason and I met at our mutual friend's wedding 5 years ago. He was the best man, and I was a bridesmaid. Our connection was immediate. Across a crowded reception hall, our eyes met, and within minutes, we were deep in conversation by the bar, completely oblivious to the celebration happening around us. By the end of the night, I knew there was something special between us. 3 dates later, I was certain I'd found my person. Coming from a small family, I'm an only child with divorced parents who live on opposite coasts. Jason's large, boisterous family initially seemed like a dream come true. His parents had been married for 35 years, still lived in the house where they raised their children, and hosted monthly family dinners that everyone was expected to attend. Besides Jason, there was his older sister Allison, 35, and younger brother Ryan, 29. They all lived within a 20-mile radius of their parents' home in the suburbs, something completely foreign to my scattered family experience. The first time Jason took me to meet his family was about 6 months into our relationship. Everyone seemed polite, asked appropriate questions about my career and background, and made the expected comments about what a lovely couple we made. But underneath the pleasantries, I sensed a reservation, particularly from Diane, Jason's mother. Her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me, and she seemed to physically position herself between Jason and me whenever possible. "My mom loves you," Jason insisted on the drive home. "She's just protective. It takes her time to warm up to people." I wanted to believe him. Family was important to Jason, which made it important to me. So I overlooked the subtle ways Diane kept me at arm's length, the way she'd reference family stories without explaining them to me, how she'd called Jason multiple times while we were on dates, her habit of planning family events without checking if I could attend. Jason's sister Allison was different. From the beginning, she made genuine efforts to include me, texting me directly to arrange coffee dates and shopping trips, making sure I knew the family inside jokes. "Don't take mom personally," she advised during one of our early outings. "She's been the center of the family universe for so long, it's hard for her to adjust to new planets in the solar system." Ryan, the younger brother, was harder to read. He seemed to take his emotional cues from his mother, maintaining a polite but distinct distance. His wife Stephanie appeared to have fully assimilated into the family, often taking Diane's side and emulating her mannerisms in a way that sometimes felt like a pointed lesson in how I should behave. As the months passed and Jason and I grew more serious, I tried everything to win Diane's approval. I brought thoughtful gifts to family gatherings, offered to help with dishes and preparation, remembered everyone's birthdays and preferences, and listened attentively to Diane's stories about her garden club and church activities. Nothing seemed to thaw the invisible wall between us. When Jason proposed, I hoped it would signal a turning point. Surely now that I was officially joining the family, Diane would embrace me. The engagement dinner was at their home, and while Diane went through all the proper motions, making toasts, showing appropriate emotion, taking photos, there was still that underlying coolness. She referred to our wedding as Jason's wedding rather than your wedding, and began making suggestions that prioritized family traditions over what we might want. "That's just how she is," became Jason's standard response whenever I tried to discuss his mother's behavior. "She doesn't mean anything by it. It's important to her to feel included." So I adjusted. I included Diane in wedding planning, deferred to family traditions even when they didn't align with my vision, and continued to extend olive branch after olive branch. When we bought our first home, I invited Diane to help decorate. When we discussed future children, I assured her she would be an involved grandmother. I tried everything to prove I wasn't taking her son away. I was simply adding to their family. Despite all this, the monthly family dinners remained a particular source of anxiety. They were held at Diane and Thomas's home, always featured Diane's cooking. She would not accept contributions and followed unspoken rules that everyone but me seemed to understand. Still, I viewed each dinner as an opportunity to strengthen my place in the family, approaching each one with renewed optimism that this time might be different. The dinner last month was no exception. The evening of the notorious dinner began like any other family gathering. Jason and I arrived at Diane and Thomas's sprawling colonial home in the suburbs precisely at 6 o'clock. Diane was a stickler for punctuality. The front door opened before we even reached it, Diane appearing with arms outstretched. "Jason, sweetheart," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight embrace as if she hadn't seen him in months rather than the 2 weeks it had actually been. "I've missed you so much." She held on to him for several long moments before finally releasing him and turning to me with a considerably cooler smile. "Mackenzie, hello." She offered a brief, stiff hug that felt more like a formality than a greeting between family members. Inside, the house was immaculate as always. Diane prided herself on her homemaking skills, and it showed in every perfectly arranged throw pillow and artfully displayed family photo. I couldn't help but notice that the newest family portraits, taken at Christmas, had been arranged in a way that placed me slightly outside the main grouping. Jason's father Thomas greeted us in the living room with his usual warm handshake. Unlike his wife, Thomas had always treated me with genuine kindness, though he rarely contradicted Diane on anything. He was a quiet, gentle man who seemed content to let his wife orchestrate family matters while he focused on his woodworking hobby and retirement golf games. "The kids are already here," Thomas informed us, referring to Allison and Ryan and their respective partners as if they were still teenagers instead of adults in their 30s. We moved into the formal living room where Allison sat with her husband Derek. She jumped up immediately to greet me with a sincere hug. "Mackenzie, I love that top on you. Is it new?" Allison had always made efforts to make me feel included, for which I was endlessly grateful. Ryan and Stephanie were perched on the love seat, deep in conversation with Diane. They all looked up when we entered, their discussion abruptly halting. Ryan gave his brother a backslapping hug and nodded to me with a polite, "Hey, Mackenzie." Stephanie offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had interrupted something important, something about me. The suspicion grew when I caught Diane and Stephanie exchanging glances as I sat down beside Jason on the sofa. Conversation flowed around me, focused primarily on family matters, Allison's son's school performance, Ryan's recent promotion, the church fundraiser Diane was organizing. Whenever I attempted to join in, I found myself either talked over or acknowledged briefly before the subject changed. At one point, Allison tried to include me by asking about my recent work conference, but Diane interrupted almost immediately. "Before I forget, Jason, did you talk to Uncle Frank about coming to the lake house this summer? You know how he likes to plan ahead." Jason seamlessly shifted to discussing summer plans, my conference anecdote left hanging in the air unfinished. I caught Allison's apologetic glance, but forced a smile to show it didn't bother me. When Diane announced she needed to check on dinner, I offered to help as I always did. "Oh, that's sweet, dear, but I have my system," she replied, the same response she gave every time. "But Stephanie is helping me tonight. She's been so interested in learning my special recipes." Stephanie rose with a satisfied smile, following Diane into the kitchen like a favored apprentice. Through the pass-through window, I watched them working together, heads bent close, occasionally glancing my way and speaking in hushed tones. "Don't take it personally," Thomas said quietly beside me, having noticed my observation. "Diane's particular about her kitchen." "Of course," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't about the kitchen. It never had been. Jason seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, happily catching up with his siblings. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I overheard Diane in the kitchen, her voice carrying more than she probably realized. Just not what I envisioned for him. "Stephanie, you're so much more like family to me already." I froze, my suspicions confirmed. Rather than confront what I'd heard, I retreated to the bathroom, taking deep breaths to compose myself. This was supposed to be family, but 4 years in, I still felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. When I returned, Diane was calling everyone to dinner, her voice bright with anticipation. "Everyone to the dining room. I've prepared something special tonight." The formal dining room was set with Diane's best china and crystal, a floral centerpiece perfectly arranged down the middle of the table. Name cards indicated our seating arrangement. I noticed immediately that Jason and I had been placed at opposite ends of the table, with Diane positioned right next to her son. "Isn't this lovely?" Diane beamed as everyone found their places. "I thought we'd be a bit formal tonight. It's been ages since we used the good china." As we all settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more than usual was off about this evening. The tension in the air felt thicker, more intentional. Little did I know, the real statement was about to be served alongside the main course. Diane's dining room had transformed into something from a magazine spread. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the table, crystal glasses caught the light like prisms, and the antique silver serving dishes gleamed. We all settled into our assigned seats. I was positioned between Thomas and Allison's husband Derek, as far from Jason as the table allowed. From my vantage point, I could see Jason sandwiched between his mother and Stephanie, already deep in conversation. Thomas offered a brief blessing over the food, and then the moment arrived. Diane rose dramatically from her seat, straightening her perfectly pressed blouse. "Everyone, stay seated. I'll serve tonight," she announced, though this was her usual practice for special meals. "I've prepared my famous ribeye steaks, cooked exactly to everyone's preference." With a practiced grace that came from decades of hosting, Diane lifted the heavy silver dome off the serving platter, revealing perfectly seared steaks, the aroma of rosemary and garlic filling the room. A collective murmur of appreciation rose from the table. One by one, Diane served each family member, making a small comment with each plate. "Jason, medium rare with extra rosemary, just how you like it." "Allison, medium with mushroom sauce on the side." "Ryan, medium well with a touch of blue cheese butter." Each steak was accompanied by roasted potatoes and asparagus arranged with artistic precision. As she worked her way around the table, the knot in my stomach tightened. When she reached Thomas, only 2 plates remained on the serving tray. She set one before her husband, then returned the serving tray to the sideboard, bypassing me entirely. For a moment, I thought perhaps she was bringing a second course for me, or had forgotten me in the sequence. The conversation around the table dimmed as everyone began to notice the discrepancy. I sat with an empty place setting while everyone else had a steaming plate before them. Diane disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned with a small plate of plain pasta with a thin tomato sauce, setting it unceremoniously in front of me. "Here you are, Mackenzie," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The table fell silent. Jason finally looked up from his perfect steak, confusion crossing his face. "Mom, did you forget Mackenzie's steak?" Diane returned to her seat, arranging her napkin on her lap before responding with practiced innocence. "Oh, I specifically made this for Mackenzie. Don't you remember, dear? She mentioned once that she doesn't really care for red meat." I blinked in confusion. I had never said any such thing. In fact, I loved a good steak and had complimented her cooking on the few occasions she'd served beef when I was present. I began, but Diane continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I'm sure it was at Easter. You picked around the roast beef, and I made a mental note. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable, so I made you pasta instead. I know how awkward it can be when everyone's eating something you don't care for." It was a masterful performance. She'd created a scenario where objecting would make me seem ungrateful and forgetful, while she appeared thoughtful and accommodating. Around the table, reactions varied. Thomas looked down at his plate, uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict his wife. Allison shot me a sympathetic glance. Ryan smirked slightly, exchanging a knowing look with Stephanie. And Jason, my husband, my partner, looked momentarily confused before accepting his mother's explanation. "That was thoughtful, Mom," he said, turning his attention back to his steak. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but forced a smile. "Thank you for considering me, Diane," I managed, though the words tasted bitter. The pasta was barely warm, underseasoned, and clearly thrown together as an afterthought, or worse, prepared with deliberate mediocrity. As everyone began eating their perfectly prepared steaks, the conversation deliberately excluded me. Topics shifted to family vacations taken before I was in the picture, inside jokes I couldn't possibly understand, and plans for events where my presence seemed assumed but not explicitly acknowledged. When I tried to join the conversation, mentioning a similar experience or offering a relevant comment, I was either met with brief acknowledgement before the subject changed, or worse, a slight pause before someone continued as if I hadn't spoken. By the time dinner plates were cleared, I was fighting back tears of frustration and humiliation. But the evening wasn't over. Diane disappeared into the kitchen again, returning with a tray of individual chocolate soufflés, each one perfectly risen and dusted with powdered sugar. "My special dessert," she announced proudly. "Made with the Belgian chocolate that Thomas brought back from his business trip last year." Once again, she served everyone at the table, making a show of each person's delight at receiving the delicate dessert. When she reached my place, instead of a soufflé, she set down a small plate with 2 store-bought cookies. "I wasn't sure if you'd want the soufflé, Mackenzie. It's quite rich, and I remember you mentioning watching your figure before the beach season." Another fabrication. I had never discussed my weight or diet with her. I stared at the sad cookies, the cheapest variety from the grocery store bakery section, still in their plastic packaging. The contrast between my dessert and the elegant soufflés couldn't have been more stark or more intentional. Jason was too engrossed in his dessert to notice, making appreciative noises as he dug into the chocolate creation. "Mom, you've outdone yourself. This is amazing." Diane beamed at her son's praise. "Nothing but the best for my family." The emphasis on my family wasn't lost on me. The message was clear. I might have married in, but I wasn't really one of them. I picked at one of the cookies, having lost my appetite entirely but not wanting to create a scene. Each bite of the dry, flavorless cookie felt like swallowing my dignity. Throughout the remainder of the evening, I maintained a composed facade while feeling increasingly invisible. When it was finally time to leave, I thanked Diane with what little grace I could muster. Her goodbye hug to me was perfunctory at best, while she clung to Jason as if he were heading off to war instead of a 15-minute drive home. As we walked to the car, I wondered if Jason had noticed any of what had transpired, or if he was truly blind to his mother's calculated exclusion of his wife. The interior of our car felt like a pressure cooker as Jason navigated the familiar route home from his parents' house. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the occasional direction from the GPS. I certainly wasn't speaking, and Jason seemed lost in his own thoughts, probably replaying highlights from the family gathering. 5 minutes into the drive, I couldn't contain myself any longer. The evening's humiliation was too fresh, too raw to ignore. "Jason," I began, working to keep my voice steady, "did you notice what happened at dinner tonight?" He glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. "Your mother served steak to everyone except me. And then she did the same thing with dessert." Jason shrugged, his expression dismissive. "She was trying to be considerate, Mackenzie. She thought you didn't like red meat." "But I never said that," I insisted, turning in my seat to face him directly. "I love steak. You know that. We had steak last week at home, and I specifically commented on how much I enjoyed it." "Maybe she misremembered," Jason replied, his tone indicating he considered the matter trivial. "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," I countered, my frustration mounting. "Your mother deliberately excluded me from the family meal. Did you see what she gave me instead? Plain pasta and store-bought cookies while everyone else got gourmet food." Jason's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You're overreacting. My mom went to a lot of trouble to host dinner. She made something special for everyone." "No, she made something special for everyone except me," I corrected him. "And this isn't an isolated incident, Jason. She's been doing things like this since we got married. The Christmas gifts that are always slightly off, the way she forgets to include me in family photos, how she interrupts me or changes the subject when I try to join conversations. That's just how my mom is, Jason said, trotting out his standard defense. She doesn't mean anything by it. I felt a surge of anger at his willful blindness. No, Jason. That's not just how she is. She's perfectly capable of being warm and inclusive to everyone else. Did you see how she treats Stephanie? They're like best friends. The difference is how she treats me specifically. So now you're jealous of my brother's wife? Jason scoffed, taking a turn more sharply than necessary. Stephanie makes an effort with my mom. She helps in the kitchen, shows interest in family traditions. I've tried all that. I interjected, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Your mother rebuffs every attempt I make. She won't let me help in the kitchen. She changes plans when I try to participate. She talks over me when I ask about family traditions. Tonight, I literally offered to help and she said no, then immediately asked Stephanie instead. Jason was shaking his head before I even finished speaking. You're being too sensitive. Mom isn't trying to exclude you. Then what would you call serving everyone but me the same meal? I demanded. What would you call whispering with Stephanie while looking at me? What would you call repeatedly interrupting me when I try to speak? I'd call it you looking for problems where there aren't any, Jason snapped. My family has always been close. Maybe you're the one creating distance, because you're not used to a tight-knit family. His words stung like a slap. That's not fair. I've done everything possible to become part of your family. Your mother is the one keeping me at arm's length, and you refuse to see it because it's easier to blame me than stand up to her. There you go again, trying to come between me and my family, Jason said, his voice rising to match mine. Every time we visit them, you find something to complain about on the way home. It's exhausting. I'm not trying to come between you and anyone, I insisted, fighting back tears of frustration. I'm asking you to acknowledge how your mother treats your wife and stand up for our marriage. There's nothing to stand up for. You're creating drama over a misunderstanding about food preferences. The conversation continued in circles as we drove, with Jason defending his mother at every turn and minimizing my concerns. By the time we pulled into our driveway, we were barely speaking. The gulf between us felt wider than ever. Inside our home, Jason headed straight for the guest room. I'm sleeping in here tonight. I need space to think without being accused of betraying you by loving my family. The door closed firmly behind him, leaving me alone in our bedroom, still in my dinner clothes, feeling more isolated than ever. As I mechanically went through my nighttime routine, a realization settled heavily in my chest. Jason would never stand up to his mother for me. In his mind, her behavior was either justified or imagined, and I was the problem for pointing it out. Something needed to change, and I was beginning to understand that I would have to be the one to make it happen. No one else was going to advocate for my place in this family, not even my husband. The fluorescent lights of the physical therapy clinic buzzed overhead as I attempted to focus on my patient's rehabilitation exercises. Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old recovering from knee replacement surgery, noticed my distraction. You're somewhere else today, Mackenzie, she observed, pausing her leg lifts. Everything okay at home? I forced a smile and adjusted her positioning. Just a little tired. Let's try 5 more repetitions. In truth, I'd barely slept. Jason and I had exchanged only the most necessary words that morning, a stilted dance of "coffee's ready" and "I'll be home late" that felt like communicating with a stranger rather than my husband of 4 years. When my lunch break finally arrived, I retreated to my office and closed the door, pulling out my phone to call the one person who might understand. It was a disaster, Brooke, I confessed to my best friend after summarizing the previous night's events. The worst part is Jason can't, or won't, see what's happening. Your mother-in-law is a piece of work, Brooke replied, indignation evident in her voice. Who serves everyone steak except one person? That's not a misunderstanding, that's a power move. Exactly, I exclaimed, relieved to have my perception validated. But when I try to explain it to Jason, he accuses me of being oversensitive or trying to come between him and his family. Classic mama's boy behavior, Brooke diagnosed. He's been conditioned his whole life to think his mother can do no wrong. As we talked, Memories of other incidents with Diane surfaced, moments I'd previously dismissed or downplayed for the sake of family harmony. The time she accidentally excluded me from the family Christmas card photo shoot, then claimed the photographer had a limited time slot when I arrived. The birthday gift of a size 10 dress when she knew perfectly well I wore a 6. The way she consistently referred to Jason and me as my son and his wife rather than using my name. It's been happening all along, I realized aloud. I've just been making excuses because I wanted so badly to be accepted. You can't change her, Mac, Brooke said gently. But you can change how you respond to her behavior. Just as I was about to reply, my phone beeped with another incoming call. Allison, Jason's sister. I quickly promised to call Brooke back and switched calls. Mackenzie, I owe you an apology, Allison began without preamble. I should have said something last night. What Mom did was deliberately hurtful, and I sat there silently like a coward. Her candor took me by surprise. You noticed then? I wasn't imagining things. God, no, Allison confirmed emphatically. Everyone noticed. Dad was mortified. He tried to catch my eye several times, but neither of us had the guts to challenge Mom at her own dinner table. Jason thinks I'm overreacting, I said, the words still painful to admit. He says your mom was just being considerate of my preferences. Allison's bitter laugh came through clearly. That's such bull. Mom knows exactly what she's doing. She pulled the same garbage with Derek when we first got married. She did. This was news to me. Derek and Diane seem to have a comfortable relationship now. Oh yeah, Mom's always been territorial about her children, especially her sons. With Ryan, she basically handpicked Stephanie. They went to the same church. Stephanie's mother is in Mom's garden club. Stephanie was pre-approved, so to speak. I considered this new information. So, what changed with Derek? You two seem fine with your mom now. Derek and I presented a united front, Allison explained. And, honestly, Dad finally stepped in after Mom reduced me to tears at Thanksgiving one year. He may seem passive, but Dad has his limits. The key was that Derek and I were on the same team. I didn't excuse Mom's behavior, and he didn't take it personally. By the time our call ended, I had a lot to think about. Allison had confirmed my suspicions and provided valuable context for Diane's behavior. This wasn't about me personally, it was about Diane's difficulty accepting any woman she hadn't selected for her sons. The problem was that unlike Allison and Derek, Jason and I weren't presenting a united front. If anything, Jason was aligned with his mother against me. That evening, I searched online for advice about difficult in-law relationships, finding articles and forum posts from people in similar situations. Many experts emphasize the importance of setting boundaries without forcing your spouse to choose between you and their parent. One licensed therapist wrote that the problem isn't that your mother-in-law is difficult, it's that your spouse hasn't established appropriate boundaries with their parent. I called and made an appointment with a counselor for myself, determined to gain perspective and strategies. Dr. Levine, a family therapist with 30 years of experience, listened attentively to my situation. Your mother-in-law's behavior is what we call territorial marking, she explained during our session. She's establishing her primacy in her son's life. The question isn't whether her behavior is inappropriate, it clearly is, but how you can respond effectively without damaging your marriage further. I feel like any response will damage my marriage at this point, I admitted. Jason is so defensive of his mother. That's because he's caught in a loyalty bind, Dr. Levine said. He feels that supporting you means betraying his mother, and vice versa. The key is to remove that binary thinking. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about establishing healthy relationships all around. Over the next few days, as Jason and I maintained our cool politeness at home, I developed a plan. I wouldn't try to force Jason to see his mother's behavior differently. That approach had failed repeatedly. Instead, I would address the situation directly but respectfully the next time it occurred, without putting Jason in the middle. The opportunity would come sooner than expected. Thomas's birthday dinner was scheduled for the following weekend, and the entire family would be gathering at Diane and Thomas's home once again. This time, I would be prepared. I practiced what I might say if similar situations arose, focusing on I statements rather than accusations. I prepared a special dish to bring, my grandmother's heirloom recipe for bourbon pecan pie, Thomas's favorite dessert that I'd made for him once before to great appreciation. Most importantly, I strengthened my resolve not to be sidelined or silenced again. I'm ready for this, I told my reflection the morning of Thomas's birthday dinner. I deserve a place in this family, and I'm going to claim it. Thomas's birthday dinner arrived with picture-perfect weather, a beautiful spring evening with golden sunlight filtering through the trees in Diane and Thomas's backyard. I had suggested to Jason that we arrive early to help with preparations, a proposal he readily agreed to, relieved by my apparent enthusiasm for the family gathering after our tense week. My grandmother's bourbon pecan pie was carefully packed in a vintage pie carrier, the recipe card tucked inside. I'd spent the previous evening baking, determined that this contribution would be both meaningful and impossible to dismiss. Dad will love that you made his favorite, Jason commented as we drove, the first genuinely warm interaction we'd had in days. I hope so, I replied, offering a smile. I want this evening to go well. Jason reached over and squeezed my hand. Thanks for making an effort. Family means everything to me. I squeezed back, not voicing the thought that completed his sentence in my mind. Family means everything to me, too, which is why I need your family to accept me as one of their own. When we arrived, Jason used his key to let us in, another small reminder that he belonged in a way I didn't yet. Mom? Dad? We're here early to help, he called out as we entered. Diane appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, looking momentarily thrown by our early arrival. Jason. I wasn't expecting you for another hour. Mackenzie suggested we come help with preparations, he explained, giving me an encouraging nod. Diane's gaze shifted to me, her expression cooling slightly before she manufactured a smile. How thoughtful. I suppose an extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt, though I have my system. I brought dessert, I said, holding up the pie carrier. Thomas mentioned how much he loves bourbon pecan pie at Christmas, so I made my grandmother's recipe. It was a blue ribbon winner at the Kentucky State Fair 3 years running. For a moment, Diane looked genuinely flustered. Oh, I've already made Thomas's birthday cake. It's tradition. Before I could respond, Thomas himself emerged from his workshop at the back of the house, face lighting up at the sight of us. Is that bourbon pecan pie I hear about? Mackenzie, you remembered. He embraced me warmly, a genuine welcome that contrasted sharply with Diane's reception. That was the best pie I ever tasted. Having it again is the perfect birthday gift. Diane's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. Well, we'll have both then. Plenty of dessert to go around. She turned back toward the kitchen. Jason, dear, your father could use help setting up the patio furniture for dinner. We thought we'd eat outside since the weather's so lovely. It was a transparent attempt to separate us, but I was prepared. I'll help you in the kitchen, Diane, I offered, following her before she could object. The kitchen was a hive of controlled chaos. Clearly Diane had been in the midst of multiple preparations. A standing rib roast sat on the counter, already seasoned and ready for the oven. Various side dishes in different stages of completion filled the countertops. You really don't need to help, Diane insisted, her tone making it clear this was less courtesy and more command. I have everything under control. I'm sure you do, I replied pleasantly, washing my hands at the sink. But many hands make light work, as my grandmother used to say. What can I take care of for you? Reluctantly, Diane assigned me the task of preparing the salad, the simplest job she could give me, but I accepted it without comment. As we worked side by side in strained silence, I could feel her discomfort with my presence in her domain. When Stephanie arrived 30 minutes later, the dynamic shifted immediately. Stephanie, thank goodness you're here, Diane exclaimed with obvious relief. I need your help with the Yorkshire pudding. You have such a knack for it. Happy to help, Diane, Stephanie replied, shooting me a smug glance as she donned an apron and took her place at Diane's side. I continued methodically preparing the elaborate salad, adding touches of my own candied walnuts, shaved Parmesan, and a homemade vinaigrette that I knew would elevate the dish. When Diane wasn't looking, I seasoned the roast potatoes that had been sitting bland and forgotten, adding rosemary and garlic. As family members began to arrive, the kitchen grew crowded. Allison appeared at my side, bumping my shoulder companionably. "Looks like you're making Grandma's fancy salad obsolete," she whispered, eyeing my creation appreciatively. "Just trying to contribute," I murmured back. "Standing your ground." "I like it," she replied with a knowing smile. When it came time to move the food outdoors, I noticed Diane had prepared an elaborate place setting at the head of the table for Thomas, with Jason and Ryan positioned in places of honor on either side. My place card was at the far end, separated from Jason once again. Without comment, I discreetly rearranged the cards, placing mine next to Jason's. When Diane returned with another serving dish, she noticed the change immediately, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, I had a specific arrangement in mind," she said, reaching for the cards. "I thought spouses would want to sit together," I replied calmly but firmly. "Especially since Jason and I haven't had much quality time lately with our work schedules." Before Diane could object further, Thomas appeared. "That makes perfect sense to me. It's my birthday, and I'd like to see happy couples enjoying themselves together." Diane couldn't argue with the birthday honoree, though her tight smile spoke volumes. One small victory secured, I turned my attention to helping bring out the remaining dishes. When everyone was seated and Thomas had been properly toasted, Diane rose to serve the main course, a repeat performance of her ribeye ritual from the previous dinner. My heart raced as she worked her way around the table, wondering if she would attempt the same exclusion. Sure enough, as she approached me with only one serving left on her tray, I could see her calculating expression. Before she could pass me by or produce some inferior alternative, I spoke up clearly. "That rib roast looks absolutely wonderful, Diane. I noticed last time you served me something different. I actually love beef, so I'd prefer the same meal as everyone else, please." A startled silence fell over the table. Diane froze, the serving utensils hovering over the last portion. Her eyes darted to Jason, clearly expecting him to smooth over my rudeness. Instead, it was Thomas who broke the tension with a hearty laugh. "Of course Mackenzie gets the roast. Why wouldn't she? And make sure she gets an end piece, they're the best part." Diane had no choice but to serve me properly, though her hands trembled slightly as she did so. "I must have misunderstood your preferences," she said stiffly. "Easy mistake to make," I replied pleasantly. "I'm glad we've cleared it up." From across the table, Allison caught my eye and gave a subtle nod of approval. Ryan looked surprised, while Stephanie seemed almost disappointed that the drama had been defused. But it was Jason's expression that I found most interesting, a mixture of confusion and dawning realization as he watched the interaction unfold. The dinner proceeded with an undercurrent of tension, but I participated actively in conversations, refusing to be sidelined. When topics veered into family history I couldn't possibly know, I asked questions that required explanations. When inside jokes arose, I good-naturedly requested context. Each time, family members other than Diane readily included me, perhaps relieved that someone had finally disrupted the established pattern. When dessert time arrived, Thomas insisted on having my bourbon pecan pie alongside Diane's traditional birthday cake. As everyone savored the pie, exclaiming over its perfect balance of flavors, I shared the story of my grandmother teaching me to bake it. She was from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and this recipe has been in our family for 4 generations, I explained. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, the women in my family would gather in the kitchen at dawn to start baking. My grandmother said the secret was in how you arrange the pecans, each one placed deliberately, never just scattered. "It's absolutely delicious," Thomas declared, helping himself to a second slice. "This needs to become a birthday tradition too." I could see Diane struggling with her composure at this suggestion, but before she could object, Jason spoke up. "Mackenzie has lots of great family recipes," he said, surprising me. "Her family might be smaller than ours, but they have their own special traditions too." It was the first time Jason had explicitly supported me in front of his family, acknowledging the value of my background. The simple statement felt monumental. As the evening wound down and people began to help clear the table, Diane made one final attempt to reassert control. When I offered to help with dishes, she loudly announced, "Stephanie and I will handle the cleanup." "Mackenzie, why don't you go relax with the others? This is our special time together." Instead of retreating, I picked up a stack of plates and followed her into the kitchen. "I insist on helping, Diane. That's what family does for each other." She turned to face me, her composure finally cracking. "You know, Mackenzie, there are certain ways we do things in this family. Traditions that were established long before you came along." "I understand that," I replied evenly. "And I respect those traditions. But I'm Jason's wife now, and that makes me family too. I love Jason, and I want us to be family. But that requires mutual respect." The kitchen fell silent. Stephanie had frozen by the sink, openly eavesdropping. Behind me, I sensed another presence and turned to find Jason standing in the doorway, having heard the entire exchange. "Mom," he said quietly, "Mackenzie is right. She deserves the same respect you give everyone else in this family." Diane's eyes widened at her son's unexpected intervention. "Jason, I've always been nothing but welcoming." "No, Mom, you haven't," he interrupted gently but firmly. "I didn't see it before, but I do now. The seating arrangements, the different meals, the way you interrupt her. It's not right, and it needs to stop." Thomas appeared behind Jason, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Diane, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" As Thomas led a stunned Diane toward his study, Jason crossed the kitchen to stand beside me. "I'm sorry," he said simply, taking my hand. "I should have stood up for you sooner." In that moment, I felt the first real shift in our family dynamic, a small but significant victory that suggested change, while difficult, was possible after all. 1 month after Thomas's birthday dinner, Jason and I sat in the waiting room of Dr. Levine's family counseling practice. His leg bounced nervously as we waited for our names to be called. "You okay?" I asked, placing my hand on his knee. He covered my hand with his own. "Yeah, just never thought I'd be in couples counseling 6 weeks ago. Actually, never thought I'd need it." After the confrontation at his father's birthday dinner, Jason had finally begun to see the pattern of his mother's behavior and his own role in enabling it. The realization had been painful for him, acknowledging that his mother wasn't perfect and that he had failed to support his wife, but he'd committed to working through it together. "The Williamsons?" Dr. Levine's assistant called, and we followed her down the hallway to a comfortable office with soft lighting and 2 plush sofas. This was our third session, focused specifically on establishing healthy boundaries with family. Dr. Levine had helped us identify our core issues: Jason's lifelong conditioning to prioritize his mother's feelings above all else, my fear of asserting myself and then being abandoned, and our shared difficulty communicating about family tensions. "How did the homework go?" Dr. Levine asked once we were settled. Jason and I exchanged glances. Our assignment had been to draft a joint statement of boundaries to present to Diane and Thomas, a task that had prompted several lengthy discussions. "It was challenging," Jason admitted. "Finding the balance between being respectful to my parents while still being clear about our expectations. But productive," I added. "We realized we actually want the same things: a close family relationship without the manipulation and exclusion." The most significant development had been Jason's suggestion that we meet with his parents privately to clear the air. The meeting was scheduled for later that week, and we'd spend hours preparing what we would say. "I'm nervous about facing my mom," Jason confessed during our session. "She's never responded well to criticism." "Remember, this isn't about criticizing your mother," Dr. Levine reminded him. "It's about expressing your needs as a couple and establishing how you expect to be treated going forward." By the end of the hour, we felt more prepared for the difficult conversation ahead. As we walked to our car, Jason pulled me into a sudden embrace. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he murmured into my hair. "I know it would have been easier to walk away." 3 days later, we sat in Diane and Thomas's living room, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. Thomas had made coffee, which sat untouched on the table between us. Diane perched on the edge of her armchair, her posture defensive before we'd even begun. "We wanted to talk to you both about our family dynamics," Jason began carefully. There have been some patterns that have been hurtful to Mackenzie, and by extension, to our marriage. Diane immediately bristled. If this is about Thomas's birthday dinner, I think Mackenzie made her feelings quite clear already. Mom, Jason said, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard him use with his mother. This isn't about one dinner. It's about a pattern that's been going on since Mackenzie and I got married. What followed was a difficult but necessary conversation. Jason calmly outlined specific instances where Diane had excluded or undermined me, while I expressed my desire to be accepted as part of the family. Thomas remained largely silent but supportive, occasionally nodding in agreement with our points. Diane, predictably, was defensive. I've always tried to make everyone comfortable, she insisted. If Mackenzie felt excluded, that was never my intention. Intent and impact are different things, Mom, Jason replied. Regardless of your intention, the impact has been hurtful. Though Diane never offered a direct apology, she did eventually acknowledge that perhaps she had been set in her ways about family traditions and possibly reluctant to accept changes to her family structure. All I've ever wanted is for my children to be happy, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue Thomas handed her. If I've made things difficult, I suppose I need to reconsider my approach. It wasn't the full recognition of responsibility I'd hoped for, but it was a beginning. We left with an agreement to start fresh, with clear expectations about respectful treatment going forward. She'll never fully admit she was wrong, Jason said as we drove home. That's not who my mother is. But she heard us, and that's what matters. Over the following months, we saw gradual improvements. Allison and I grew closer, meeting for coffee weekly and becoming genuine friends rather than just in-laws. She confided that our stand had inspired her to address some of her own lingering issues with Diane. You've changed the family dynamic, she told me over lattes one afternoon. In a good way. Mom's having to adjust to not being the unchallenged matriarch anymore. Thomas became more assertive as well, gently correcting Diane when she slipped into old habits of exclusion. During one family dinner, when Diane referred to my son and his wife rather than using my name, Thomas immediately interjected, "You mean Jason and Mackenzie, dear," with a pointed look that didn't go unnoticed. Jason and I continued our counseling sessions, working through layers of family programming and building stronger communication skills. The process wasn't always smooth, we had setbacks and arguments, but our commitment to each other never wavered. 3 months after our confrontation with Diane, we attended the monthly family dinner with much less anxiety than before. When we arrived, I noticed something significant. The dining room table was set with place cards, and Jason and I were seated together, in positions of honor near Thomas. More remarkably, when Diane served her famous pot roast, she served me first, with the best portion. "I remembered you mentioned enjoying the end pieces with extra gravy," she said, a small olive branch that represented a larger shift. "Thank you, Diane," I replied sincerely. "It looks delicious." The conversation throughout dinner flowed more naturally than ever before, with everyone making efforts to include each other. When I shared news about a promotion at the physical therapy clinic, Diane actually asked follow-up questions about my work, a first in our relationship. Later, as we helped clear the table, Diane approached me in the kitchen. "Thomas and I are planning a weekend at the lake house next month," she said, her voice slightly hesitant. "We'd like you and Jason to come. Maybe you could help me plan the menus? I know you have that wonderful pecan pie recipe, and Thomas has been asking for it again." It was perhaps the closest thing to an invitation into her domain that Diane had ever offered. "I'd like that," I said, smiling. "I have some other family recipes I think everyone might enjoy too." That night, as Jason and I prepared for bed, I reflected on how far we'd come. "Your mom actually asked for my input on the lake house menus," I told him, still slightly amazed. "Progress," he agreed, pulling me into his arms. Slow, but real. Standing up for myself had changed not just my relationship with Diane, but the entire family system. Jason had found his voice as a husband rather than just a son. Thomas had reclaimed his role as an equal partner in his marriage. Allison had been inspired to set her own boundaries. Even Ryan was showing subtle signs of greater independence from his mother's influence. The journey wasn't over, family relationships never are, but we had fundamentally altered its course. I had found my place not by waiting to be fully accepted, but by respectfully yet firmly claiming it. As I drifted to sleep in my husband's arms, I thought about how many people must struggle with similar family dynamics, feeling voiceless and excluded. If my story could help even one person find the courage to stand up for themselves with dignity rather than combativeness, it would give meaning to the difficult path we'd traveled. Have you ever had to stand up to a difficult family member? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles can be the most powerful support. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about navigating complicated family dynamics. Remember, finding your voice doesn't mean starting a war. Sometimes it's the key to building genuine peace. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family relationships.